So that was the first police action that they did. This took place in Poland. It was the first time that the group had deployed to Poland. And to give you, when you hear what they did, yeah, you hear some people that had a hard time with it. But still, like I said, that was a small percentage. That was like 10%, maybe 15% of people that said, no, I'm not going to do it, that hid or made themselves busy with other things. Most of the guys just went ahead and did what they were told to do. And you think to yourself, okay, well, who were these guys? Were they hardened combat veterans from the front line? Were they young, sort of brainwashed Nazi youth that's what they believed in, and their mind just saw that as the reality that they had to go through with? And this is the strange thing about this book, is that that's not what it is. That's not who these guys were. And now I'll go to the book to talk about who they actually were. For the most part, Reserve Police Battalion 101 was now composed of men without any experience of German occupation methods in Eastern Europe, or for that matter, with the exception of the very oldest who were World War I veterans, any kind of military service. Most of these guys aren't even from the military. The battalion consisted of 11 officers, 5 administrative officials in charge of financial matters relating to pay and provisioning, lodging, etc., and 486 non-commissioned officers and men. The battalion was divided into 3 companies, each of approximately 140 men when at full strength. 2 companies were commanded by police captains, and the third by a senior reserve lieutenant in the battalion. Each company was divided into 3 platoons, 2 of them commanded by reserve lieutenants, and the third by a platoon senior sergeant. So this is kind of a normal military makeup. The battalion was commanded by 53-year-old Major Wilhelm Trapp, World War I veteran and recipient of the Iron Cross First Class. Now we know World War I obviously was a brutal war, and he's a survivor of that, awarded the Iron Cross First Class, fought for Germany, and lost. What did he do after the war? Back to the book. After the war, he became a career policeman and rose through the ranks. He'd recently been promoted from captain of 2nd Company, and this was his first battalion command. Though Trapp had joined the Nazi Party in December of 1932 and thus technically qualified as an old party fighter, or Alterkampfer, he had never been taken into the SS or even given an equivalent SS rank. In spite of the fact that Himmler and Heydrich consciously tried to merge and intertwine the state and party components of their SS police empire, Trapp was clearly not considered SS material. So, and you're going to see this. These guys, I mean, there's a war going on. So why are these guys in a police battalion as opposed to being on the front lines fighting the war? The reason is because they're not quite the right material to go out and fight. And by the way, this is, we're going to get to a point soon in the war where there's some 14-year-old Hitler Youth going out to fight. But these guys aren't being selected. Back to the book. He was soon to come into conflict with his 2 captains, both young SS men, who even in their testimony more than 20 years later made no attempt to conceal their contempt for their commander as weak, unmilitary, and unduly interfering in the duties of his officers. So he's got a couple police captains that were a little bit more hardcore. Let me tell you about them. Wolfgang Hoffmann, he was born in 1914, 16 years old. He was in Hitler Youth in 1932. At 18, he was in the SS, graduated from Gymnasium, which is a college preparatory high school, in 1934, joined the police force in 1936, entered the Nazi Party in 1937. Same year he completed police training, was commissioned as a lieutenant, and now he's in the reserves in 1942, Reserve Police Battalion 101. So he'd come up through the ranks, as a Nazi. But still, even him, I mean, his formative years, he's born in 1914. So, it's not like it's all he knew. He went from 1914 to what, 1933, 1930. So he was 16 years old. He had been formed, lived as a normal German before the Nazi Party was around. We're not talking a brainwashed, complete Nazi youth. Same thing with the other guy born in 1913. This is Julius Wohlhoff. Also graduated from gymnasium, joined the Nazi Party in 1933. 1936 became SS. So these guys are more, they're more engaged in the whole Nazi party and obviously towing the line along that. Now, so that's the two police captains that are in charge of a couple of the companies inside the battalion. Now, let's talk a little bit about the men. The men aged generally from 33 to 48 years old. 5 were party members. None of them belonged to the SS. Back to the book, of the 32 non-commissioned officers on whom we have information, 22 were party members and 7 were in the SS. They ranged in age from 27 to 40 years old. Their average age was 33 and a half. They were not reservists, but rather pre-war recruits to the police. Of the rank and file, so now we're just talking about the troops, the 400 plus troops. Of the rank and file, the vast majority were from the Hamburg area. 63% were working class background, but few were skilled laborers. The majority of them held typical Hamburg working class jobs. Dock workers and truck drivers were most numerous, but there were also many warehouse and construction workers, machine operators, seamen, and waiters. About 35% were lower middle class, virtually all of them white-collar workers. 3/4 of them were in sales of some sort. The other 1/4 formed various office jobs in both government and private sector. The number of independent artisans and small businessmen were very small. Only a handful, 2%, were middle-class professionals, and very modest ones at that, such as druggists and teachers. The average age of the men was 39. Over half were between 37 and 42, a group considered too old for the Army, but most heavily conscripted for reserve police duty after September 1939. So these guys, so the men are they're 30, 40 years old, 35, 40 years old. These guys are fully developed, right? They're not
impressionable.
They're not impressionable guys that are just raised inside the Nazi culture. Because I mean, let's face it, if you're raised in any cultish religion scenario, there's a really good chance that that's what you're going to believe in, and you don't understand any other way of thinking. Yeah. So you can, I don't know if you can be excused, but it's understandable how you end up that way.
Yeah.
Back to the book. The men of Reserve Police Battalion were from the lower orders of German society. They had experienced neither social nor geographic mobility by virtue of their age. And here's what we're just talking about. By virtue of their age, of course, all went through their formative period in the pre-Nazi era. These were men who had known political standards and moral norms other than those of the Nazis. Most came from Hamburg, by reputation one of the least Nazified cities in Germany. And the majority came from a social class that had been anti-Nazi in its political culture. These men would not seem to have been a very promising group from which to recruit mass murderers on behalf of Nazi vision of a racial utopia free of Jews. And I think the title of this book is Ordinary Men. And that's why. Because that's what we're talking about here. Ordinary men. I mean, that's about a clear cross-section of society than you could come up with. I mean, you come up with the same cross-section of society in America. A bunch of guys working as construction workers, waiters, truck drivers, dock workers. I mean, that's what people do. Oh, what age are they? They're 35, 40 years old. Okay. Is that the group that you think is you're going to be able to take out and get them to murder thousands and thousands of people face to face?